morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Diane Hamilton. I am Michelle Hamilton. This is my colleague, Rabbi Marc Gafni. And we've been invited by John and Pam to come down and spend a couple of days with you, basically diving into both the integral material and then also our translation of that, which is how it's recognized as a force of love in the world. And what does that mean, actually, for it to be a force of love? And Pam just made the comment that, how many of you, before I even start speaking, how many of you are familiar with integral theory generally? Is everybody here kind of an integralist? Okay, good. So just the idea that we're going to take what is kind of a highly conceptual framework and plug it into a kind of map of your life, of your awareness, and of your capacity to love in the world, and that's really what we're going to focus on for the next couple of days. We're both lineage holders in different traditions. I grew up as a Jack Mormon in Tooele County, and I told people earlier that Lyman and I used to be in the same riding club when we were kids. We wore the same little silk vests and black ties and did the drill at the halftime show at the rodeo. So we have a long history. And his father and my father were best friends in high school.
Awesome.
But we probably haven't seen each other in 40 years. So that's interesting. I have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize for that.
Can we do that together?
Yeah.
It's our first group activity. That was really good.
Are you set with Kleenex or do you need some?
I got them, but thanks. Thank you. So, in terms of my spiritual path, though, I would say that while I was raised in a Utah Mormon community, and like all of us who are Americans, we're kind of infused with Christian tradition. I lost 7 of my good friends when I was 17 years old. 4 of them in a plane. One was killed in a knife fight, one was killed in an automobile, and one committed suicide in a period of about 6 months. So I was kind of provoked into what you might call an existential crisis, where what we say in the Zen tradition, where the great matter of life and death became really important to me. And for whatever reason, and each of you has your own path and your life and the way in which you open to spirit and the ways in which you have defined yourself as an evolving person in the world. And each path and each life and each way of doing that is unique. In particular, we're going to spend some time really talking about embodying your unique path on the end of the weekend. And all legitimate. That's one of the ways we differ from kind of the orthodox level of religion, as we see that each particular path, both in terms of the traditions themselves and in terms of how they're embodied in each person and what the specifics of your unfolding is just completely legitimized by your being. So in my case, I couldn't get my questions answered adequately within the Mormon Church because I was just so radically rational and just so inquisitive from an analytic point of view. And so I studied philosophy in college and then gradually just kind of moved over to looking into the Buddhist tradition and ended up going to Naropa Institute when I was 24 years old, which in those days, these days, it's not quite, meditation is on the cover of Time magazine and yoga is on the cover of People magazine. It's not as big a thing, but 25 years ago it actually was. My parents thought I was out of my mind. And I just did what you all have done. I just followed what interested me. I followed my heart and I followed my life. And so I started to study the East and the teachings of Buddhism in my early 20s. And my first teacher was a Tibetan teacher. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Chogyam Trungpa. Have any of you heard of him? He was a radically brilliant teacher in the West because he really understood the Western mind and presented Buddhist teachings through the vehicle of psychology. And then after he died very young at about 47, I went for about 7 years without a path, but again, I'm making a lot of assumptions about your lives, but I studied in shamanic traditions, I hung out in green ecological worlds, I studied massage, I did all these things. But in about 1996, I realized if I wanted to go deeper into my meditative path that I really needed to find a master. And at that point, I was introduced to my teacher, Genpo Roshi, who's a Zen master who lives in Salt Lake City. I don't know why, again, most peculiar event. So he and I met in '96. I became a student in '98. And received what we call Dharma transmission, which means that I became a Zen teacher about 2 years ago. And 2 years prior to that, I was introduced to Ken Wilber, to the Integral Institute, and just this big wind of integral work came up, and I started spending a lot of time working for the Integral Institute. Rabbi Marc and I met there, as well as Sally Durgananda from the yogic tradition and David Data from the yogic tradition. What's beautiful about the Integral Spiritual Center is it brings all these traditions together so that we're not just having interfaith dialogue, but we're actually practicing and influencing each other. So in a way, I see this weekend as a fruition of that, you know, of the integral spiritual inclination, that we're probably all practicing from an integral point of view, and that the fact that Ken's work is providing us a framework for understanding what it is we're doing. If we could impart some of that, and we can practice together, and we can open up our awareness in a way that broadens our experience, relaxes our minds, and opens our hearts, I consider it a good weekend. So that's my little 2 cents. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, it's just nice to be here. It's a great room. Feels good. Nice chart, a little daunting. A lot of colors. It's just a quick, introduction. Hello. My name's Mark. I was born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Anyone know Pittsfield, Massachusetts? I saw one. I said, oh, doesn't usually happen. What were you doing there, brother?
I don't live there. I lived in Amherst for 10 years.
I understand. Well, remember Harry Chapin? Harry Chapin said about Watertown, Pennsylvania and Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I spent a week there one afternoon. It's just one of those towns. And it's actually near the Tanglewood. A little slow crowd here. They're a little,
Yes.
And I grew up there for a bunch of years. My parents are European. Came over after the war and all the kind of craziness of what was World War II. And so I was kind of first generation American. And went to Israel at around age 18, kind of pretty early. And then did some stuff in the States, but spent the bulk of my adult life in Israel. Kind of teaching in Israel and leading a kind of alternative, spiritual, kind of renewal, Hebrew wisdom, Kabbalah, insane, bohemian scene for about 20 years, for a long time. That's really what we did. And, kind of just trying to figure out what the kind of Hebrew wisdom path was and how it could, illuminate Israel and its neighbors in a way that might actually be healing to Israel. And Israel's a very, very complex, difficult place. It's a long way from Wayne County. My son, Eitan, who I always send blessings before we teach or do anything, is 20 years old. He's in the Israeli army. He's a beautiful, beautiful kid who basically likes to hang out and play his guitar. He can't quite figure out why he's in an army. And so he's actually this little kind of commander in the middle of the army, wanting to play his guitar, and his other brother's just about to join the army. And so that's kind of one of the realities of Israel. It says, you guys, it's a citizen's army, right? Meaning that there is no standing army. It's just your local guy, girl, is just kind of hanging out doing the army for 3 years. And so we tried to kind of create an alternative moment of spirit in the country, both in its public culture. We created kind of I guess what would you call it in American terms, kind of like Oprah is here, and that kind of show. It was my show called The Gafni Show in the country for many years. And kind of serious kind of academic work to try and find the roots of Kabbalah at Oxford, where I kind of hung out for a while. That was actually, of all the things I've done in my life, it's the only one that my mother liked. I was very happy. Dr. Gafni, nice. Made her very pleased. There's nothing else I've done that actually called the neighbors, but that was good. She was happy about that. The story, Mr. and Mrs. Goldstein announced the birth of their son, Dr. Goldstein. So that's all right, slow here, sorry. Born free, my father's a doctor. Anyway, so moving along here.